since I started this podcast, I've got this this fascination with how music can really sort of whisk you off into this sort of other distant world. You know, kind of like musical Narnia, not just through the lyrics, but also the song structures, the atmosphere. The relationship of current music to past decades, because we sort of interpret and measure music by decades, don't we? Although it'd be interesting to see what characterizes the current decade and also the one that we've just escaped. And as always, I'm at risk of becoming sort of tediously rooted in the theoretical, but I'm just interested in what makes musicians go to these places, what's influenced their core mindset, and how this sort of plays into what's influencing at the time they sit down and write, and how in this really sort of fast-paced, volatile world, the music that they write keeps pace with their influences, and I guess also by return how they themselves keep pace with what seems like a sort of exponential growth in stuff that influences us. My guest today's got as so many strings to his bow, and I mean, I can barely cope with two. He's a singer-songwriter, a multi-instrumentalist, musician, filmmaker, DJ, and producer, and always at least it appears to me, produces music on his own terms. And in keeping with that, he's due to release a new LP called World of Hassle, and it's going to be the first under his own name, which is it's really a sort of glorious kind of collage that takes you to a world that's got one foot in a past decade, one in the here and now, and I'm going to put myself out there now, one in a kind of augmented reality game. And with that, I've just realised that makes 3 feet. So I should probably just get on with it. And welcome my guest, Alan Palomo. Alan, welcome, and thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me. That's quite the introduction, man. You should write the Wikipedia.
I should do, yeah. I'll be one of those people that's just constantly on Wikipedia doing those minor edits that are so irritating. It's interesting that now this sort of serendipity has become. I don't know about how you feel about it. It's become a bigger part. I've noticed more serendipitous occurrences in the last year than I've ever had. And interestingly, just the other day, on Tuesday, in fact, I interviewed I'm involved in a counterculture arts magazine, and I interviewed Girl Ray, so Poppy and Sophie from Girl Ray, and we were talking about their what success looks like for them and their kind of ambitions, and they were talking about touring, and they said we've got an announcement coming later this afternoon, and I saw the announcement and I was like, oh my god, they're touring with you.
Is. Synchronicity,
isn't it? It's just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, the idea of sort of quantizing success in sort of like specific, because I mean, it's always I feel like that's a constantly kind of evolving thing, where if you're always kind of working at it, when you reach these goals, or when you have, you're like, all right, we want, our first tour, and I remember that first North American tour, and then it's like, we want to play TV for the first time, or we want to, I want to collaborate with this person. But it's funny, it's like, I remember hearing an interview from somebody, I forget who it was, somebody at SNL, who were, they were basically saying that, like, when you're constantly working at these things, by the time you reach them, it's not like you won the lottery. It's almost like a relief, like, oh my God, okay, all right, we got this thing. And then we're moving on to the next thing, and we're moving on to the next thing. I mean, as far, for Girl Ray, it's like their record just came out. I mean, I'm so pumped for them, because it's just like, it's going to be this slow kind of building avalanche of things going on, so it's great. It's great to get to be a part of it with them, and, just play some shows on the road.
I mean, they were great. I mean, and the the album is great as well. It's a real. I just love it. It's just got so much going on in it, and it's quite a sort of journey for them over the 8 years they've sort of been going. I just think it's a great record, and it's getting a good reception as well, which is amazing for them. But you're right. This idea of sort of success is it's an interesting one, and I've sort of pondered that myself in my in my own life. As you change, as you get older, there are other kind of influences other people in your lives and things like that. I guess your core values don't change that often, shouldn't do, I guess. But what's important to you does.
I mean, I would say it reminds me of like this Rudyard Kipling poem called "If," where he's like, "You take triumph and disaster, and you treat these two imposters just the same." And I try. I
Mm,
saw like Dennis Hopper reciting that poem on the Johnny Cash show, like some
mm,
YouTube video like years ago, and it always stuck with me because it. I mean, I've always kind of like, at least for me, the way that I've like defined success has always been like I've always wanted to just be successful enough to have the resources to make the next thing that I want to make. Like
mm,
if you get money as a result of it or notoriety, like these are all byproducts, like an exhaust of coming off of the thing that actually matters to you, which is the agency to get to labor the things that you want to make. Right.
yeah.
It's weird though. I mean, you start to get older or you start to even just sort of see the world as in its current state, and there's this sort of like kind of late capitalist paranoia that everyone's like, we don't know what's going to happen in 20, 30 years, so you might as well amass as much wealth as you can. It's weird. It's like, and I
Mm,
see it amongst friends of mine where it's like, and I feel a little bit too, where
mm,
there's a fear like suddenly now money is entering the equation, and that like, well, you know tech might put us all out of a job. I mean, certainly that's the conversation with AI, or the climate might be
mm,
further destabilized, or we don't know what's going to happen with the economy. So then suddenly there's this like race to be like, I need to secure as much wealth for myself because when I'm older, shit might really hit the fan.
yeah,
And it's
yeah.
I try to ignore it. I try to like kind of keep it out of my head, but it's definitely something that's like starts to creep in, and you're just sort of like, okay. I mean, obviously if I was a family man, I by now my priorities would also include like
Mm,
making a good living so that I can support my family. And there's
mm,
there's already some of that with like parents that are getting older and stuff, but
yeah.
it's definitely it's but you try not to. It's like I still I think I've only ever made one record kind of under pressure, and it was it kind of wound up being imaginary. I think I just had a manager at the time that was just like, I just put out the first record, and they're like, if you don't bounce back with another one soon, like it's you're gonna break
Yeah.
the momentum. So, and
Mm,
it's always I think it was like I'm glad I learned that lesson in my early 20s because it was when I turn in the record, if it still comes on, like if I hear it somewhere at a cafe or something, I still remember the mixed notes. I'm still remembering like, no, oh man, I should have done another
uh,
take of that verse. So it's like it's if you're gonna put it out there and it's out there, if you're gonna have to answer for it for the rest of your life, like you better be pretty stoked on it. So I think in
yeah.
that regard, like I feel successful in that I've gotten to make for the most part, like pretty much exactly what I wanted to make, and that
Mm,
I think is not something that a lot of people get the opportunity to. So
mm,
I mean, hey, if I can pay my rent with that, like I should be so lucky, man. It's such a
yeah.
joy.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. It's an interesting one with that. About those. The just the money side of it, but also I guess it sort of feeds into lots of other things. I mean, I know exactly what you mean about that. I mean, my dad, you know, um, he sort of when he was growing up, there were three. There was him, his brother, and his sister, and they had a very unstable childhood, and as a result, well, I think that was one of the results of that was that he went to get himself an education. Became a mechanical engineer, and he did
Yeah,
he's doing a lot of drafts work, and he was good. He was good at his job, but that was something that he said to me, and I think about getting a job and things like that, and having that sort of stability because he'd had so little of it in his childhood, so that really mattered to him,
yeah.
and you can see how this sort of feeds through, can't you, into sort of through generations.
Definitely. I mean, it's interesting in that regard because it's like in relation to art, I think Gen Z actually maybe has I mean, they've kind of swung very much so in the other direction where like I think
Mm,
because of social media, if you are able to have a sponsored post or if you're doing some collaboration with a brand, it's seen as like a signifier as a proof
yeah,
of success. Whereas I think before even 10 years ago, at least making indie music in the US, there was definitely still this kind of like DIY attitude that,
yeah,
it was strange because in the beginning, like I did one
yeah,
or two things, that I kind of regret. I did like a single with Mountain Dew, when I was like in my early 20s, and it wound
yeah,
up kind of it felt funny, and I knew it was gonna be a weird gesture at the time, and
yeah,
management brought it to me, and I was like, all right, I'll try it.
Yeah.
But it's funny because then I think that there was very much so this, I mean, very much so this kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, reject capitalism, reject
Mm,
any kind of commerce. But and I agree with it to some extent. I think it was also happening in that time when the music industry was changing, and ultimately, like for me, my answer to that was always like, well, if you don't want your art to be brought to you by something, then pay for it. But if we're going to live in
mm,
this sort of ecosystem of free content, then like
mm.
unfortunately that's the other side of the equation. It's also
Yeah.
very like it's strangely
True.
disproportionate in terms of like other mediums of art, because it's like, if Michael Haneke needs a $3 million to make a movie that's going to premiere at Cannes, and people are going to golf clap him for it, that money's coming from somewhere.
Yeah.
But if a garage rock band needs like 5 grand to make a music video, and they wind up doing it in conjunction with some car company, it's like they're seen as like heretics.
It's
But
true.
obviously
Yes.
that has
Yeah.
changed. But that has changed.
Mm.
I think now that's something that I see in the past 5 years, that Gen Z is like definitely embraced. Just and maybe a little bit too much to the other side, where it's like we shouldn't
Mm.
necessarily validate our, like feel validated by the fact that brands want to pay attention to us. But
Mm.
it at least is like not it's not lying to itself about like the nature of making a living. Because, well, I mean, what's always like, when I would hear, I remember like in the early days, like I would tour and I would hear about a band, or I'd see a poster of a band in a green room, and I'd ask the promoter, it's like, oh, what was that like having them on?
Mm.
And sometimes it'd be like, oh man, well, like they're, it was actually kind of rough. Like the singer was telling me that they moved back in with their parents or stuff like that. And you want to
Mm.
imagine in your head that like that the artists that you love, like are always going to be secure, and they're, as long as they got their
Yeah. Yeah.
fans, they're gonna live through it. But it's
Yeah.
like, to me, I'm like, well, it might not be punk rock to embrace making a living, but what really isn't punk rock is like taking care of your like elderly parents. Like that's like
Absolutely.
there's
Yeah.
just an element of like life, inevitably makes its way into the narrative, and it's not always going to take place in like a DIY basement, where
Yes.
the romanticized music aspect of it is there. It makes me think of like Mike Lee movies or something, where just, it's like, but life is different. Life is something else. There's the art
Yeah.
you present, and then there's the life of it, and the life is complicated. The life has needs. The life is also not always entirely up to you.
Yeah.
You might encounter some bad luck. You might, and if this is the only skill set you have, then it should be interpreted as a vocation like any other.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think there's still and I don't know if again if this is a sort of generational thing, that there's a purism almost, I guess is
Yeah,
what you're
yeah,
saying in a way, and it goes back to the, I don't know where it goes back to. I mean, I particularly sort of remember it with emanating from punk, that
yeah,
that
yeah,
it is, it is DIY all the way, even to some bands, to the extent that you cannot make any money out of this. You cannot and should not.
yeah,
It's like, okay, well, these are great, kind of theories about how the world should work, but there has to be if you want to fight it, there has to be some element of pragmatism, in doing it, and also sort of, you know feels bad, but if you're working with the system, or almost in a way
yeah,
to
yeah,
kind
yeah,
of,
yeah.
I remember talking not so long ago, or last year, I think, to one of the members of the band, UK band Big Joni, and they are, she's, very socialist in her outlook, but there's a pragmatism. So look, we're musicians, we have to use, I don't know, like kind of Fender guitars. We have to work with the companies. That's just
Yeah.
the way that it is. But
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. It's always I mean, punk, and I say this to somebody, it's like, in my head, I think of like the movie Sid and Nancy, or like Gary
mm,
Oldman's
mm,
like playing, and I love that film, and it
yeah,
captures, it's like, yeah, but those rules, that ethos, that manifesto was written by like, people in the early 20s. It's like
yeah,
where
yeah,
it was easy to kind of like isolate that moment. But and I think there's a way in which you can continue to, live a life in the arts that feels ethical by whatever sort of
True.
socialist standard, or just whatever pragmatic, standard. But that
Yeah.
is kind of like, I mean, some of, at least just for me, the journey of like, kind of shedding the old band name and kind of approaching this sort of next epoch in my life, that
Mm.
these things are sort of related, where it's kind of like, okay, there's um there was the name that I had adopted when I was like 20,
Yeah.
and the songs that I wrote from that era, and
Mm.
I don't look back on it with any, it's like with anything other than just pride, because I
Mm.
love the discography that I made. But it did, there was a certain, I kept imagining, just like, I mean, I would joke with my friends, like, once I let myself go and it's like I'm in my 60s and I'm like begging for a Vegas residency, just like, like, you guys are a sexy crowd. Should have taken acid with
Yes.
you and you and you. It's just like that's why would I do that? Like, let's just start. It's an investment. It's like I see it as an investment in the future to just be like, just go by your own name, start building that a new narrative around that. Especially as you kind of start veering into other mediums, and
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
always there if you need it. But and you can do that again when if the mood strikes, but don't rely on it. Don't feel like you need to latch onto this romanticism, this band, this record, from a very specific time in your
Yeah.
life.
Because so obviously the name change, it there's been a bit of chit chat about it, I guess. But I mean, how do you feel about it? I mean, is it a big deal for you? Is this how do you feel about it?
I mean, I think I'm I'm excited about it because it's something that as I start to kind of focus on filmmaking as much as I'm focusing on music, it's just like,
Yeah.
well, why wouldn't you bring everybody to the same house? It's
Yeah.
not like the movie's going to be directed by Neon Indian, But
Mm. Mm.
what I on top of that, it's also like I love, I love a good comedic cliche, and I think it's like such a great 80s male rock cliche to like leave your band in your 30s in a crisis and like make like a jazz record, like
Yeah. Yeah.
Sting did it, and he's got that great. There's a great documentary called "Bring on the Night,"
Mm.
where yeah, he like hires he like quits the police and he hires this like DC jazz band, and they write a record in like a 17th century chateau outside of Paris. Like it's such an embarrassment
Yeah.
of riches.
Yeah.
But Brian Ferry, obviously, like, he perfected the formula on Avalon, and then he's just like,
Yeah.
all right, I'm out. I'm like, gonna make three more of these.
Yeah.
So there is something, I just wanted to play that narrative out.
Mm.
So there's a certain like self-awareness about the gesture, and I'm not making fun of them because I love those
Mm.
solo records they did, but it is,
Mm.
I'm like, well, I am about that age, so it's like maybe start buying some double-breasted suits and lean into that vibe.
I love it. I mean, does it feel that there's a or is there a relationship with your own identity or kind of like identity shifts that are kind of happening? I'm just interested in how names, how important names are, because I mean my own name, I grew up with it and I fucking hated it when I was a kid, and there was nothing I would have liked better than to sort of change my name, and I feel looking back now that if I had have done, then perhaps it would have sort of helped a little bit with my own identity issues that I was having at that age, or maybe it wouldn't have done.
Sure.
Maybe it was just teenager stuff. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think it's like the irony here is that it was like not going by your name and sort of not, it's not like you're hiding behind something. It's like you're presenting some sort of veneer of like something else, like,
Yeah,
Neon Indian. It sounds like a band name. It's more evocative. It sounds more conceptual, and
yeah,
then you get to a certain point where I think it can be scary at first, because I remember telling a friend of mine, I was like, yeah, I'm like thinking about going, it's like I think I might want to release this record under my own name, or I think that these songs kind of fit more in a different
mm,
framework. And he was like, well, just don't do that thing that, like, when somebody makes a solo record, it just feels like a lesser version of something that they would have done with their band or something.
yeah,
And I was very
yeah.
aware of that, but I had the
Good point.
advantage that it's like, well, the band's always been me, so it's really just about changing, it's really just changing the approach to the songwriting, and with this collection of songs, it was also like it felt representative of it because I mean, we talk about what we were saying in the intro about just kind of like music's ability to kind of take you into these little worlds. I mean, I
Yeah.
think when I first started making music, I did it out of a frustration because when I was in college, I was in the film program, and they wouldn't let you rent a camera until like your third year. So
Mm, mm,
I was just kind of stuck taking all these prerequisite classes, and I went from having a very supportive video tech teacher in high school. So my brother and I were running around making little movies and learning how to edit on Final Cut
mm,
Pro, to then
mm,
suddenly like having no creative outlet.
mm.
And I decided to do music because it was something that I could do on my own. It was something
Yeah.
that that didn't require collaboration or equipment. You could do it with a laptop. And
Yeah.
and I did. I moved into this band house, and was living with some bandmates at the time, and obviously, I owe a lot to them in terms of just like learning how to use Reason and Ableton and kind of like figuring out, the software aspect of it and playing around with that. Uh, but that was kind of the thing is like, um, I because I didn't get that outlet, I every record in my head always kind of feels like, there's some movie that's playing, in
Mm,
there, and it's always meant to kind of go alongside that, and I try to always kind of make these things out to be. I mean, conceptual can be a pretentious word, but I mean that in the way that like it's most albums, the narrative is like, like the band went into the studio for 6 weeks and they worked with this
yeah.
producer and these are the songs they wrote,
Yeah.
and that's great. Some of the best albums of all time were written with that very narrative in mind. But
Yeah.
I do like it when there is some kind of when there is some sort of overall arc, or there's a palette that's going for something specific, and you're kind of feels like you're being brought into this sort of little world, sonically,
Mm,
with in
mm.
terms of the references and in terms of the lyrics. And Vega definitely had that was probably the most that leaned into that, because the second
Mm.
record, I was trying to do like an 8-bit shoegaze thing. I was very much so in this like
Yeah.
cyberpunk phase, and I was like obsessed with, I was like reading a lot of like Katsuhiro Otomo graphic novels and stuff like that. And then the first
Yeah.
record, I was like walking out of college because I wasn't going to my classes, and I just had this like loser mentality that
Mm,
I remember watching like Strosek and Agnes Varda's Vagabond and My Own
mm,
Private Idaho, and like all these movies
mm.
about just these like people that just can't get it together, and
Together.
I
Yeah.
identified with that. I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just like wandering around. So
Mm,
that record became this sort of scrapbook of that moment. And
mm.
then, the third record very much so is just kind of like, I love how New York mythologizes itself and through these different directors, and
Mm.
Scorsese's New York isn't the same as Adrian Lynn's New York or Lynn Ramsey's New York or Spike Lee's New York. It's everyone has their own kind of vision of it,
Vision.
and I
Yeah.
really kind of wanted to be like, all right, what's my sort of cartoonish musical lens that I what's my New York like, and that's kind of what that record was about. I mean, obviously the movie After Hours was like a big influence,
Mm.
but with this record, it it was kind of it was sort of a return to that idea of like, okay, let's, I mean, it's literally the world is in the title, let's do some world building, and I
Yeah.
wanted it to feel like this kind of Pinchonian rabbit hole, where um, you know, where the record really earns its namesake. Because even just finishing it, even making it was like a world of hassle. Things kept
Oh my.
happening, and I was like in the
Oh
middle of the
really?
pandemic. I
Yeah.
remember it wasn't just that, but it was like there was like some problem in my building where they needed to suddenly start renovating all this stuff right away, and I was like trying to do locals. So I'm like avoiding the construction crew, just waiting until I can finally start
Oh god.
working.
Yeah.
And then at night, this nightingale just parked itself outside my window and just set up shop there all summer. So it's just like yammering all night, and I'm trying to figure out, like, so I can't record it in the daytime, I can't record it at night, and I'm trying to figure out how to humanely like scare away this nightingale. So
Yeah.
I'm like, I was like googling it, and I did. It's like the most throbbing gristle thing I've ever done. But I read somewhere that if you play it a competing nightingale song, that you might psyop it into thinking that there's some like
Brilliant.
superior, like Chad in its midst. So I had to like go out there with a Bluetooth speaker, like trying to scare this thing.
Oh my
And it
god.
was, yeah, it was insane. I mean, it just went on like this for months. It was, yeah, it was definitely like a comedy of errors. But but also just like, I definitely uh I thought of it. World of Hassle sounded like a publication to me, So as
Mm,
you look at the record cover, and there's all these sort of like fake headlines, and in
mm,
the inside, when you open the gatefold, I wrote like a pan review of my own just album, as like some snarky New Jersey rock critic or something. So there's a
yeah.
lot of, I mean, there's just layers and layers, and it's just like expectation, and kind of like, navigating this world that we've sort of come back out into, and it
Mm,
feels like
mm,
everything's kind of changing at this rapid pace, and trying to make sense of it, but doing it as if you were this sort of like, you know protagonist in a Thomas Pynchon novel, because in those
yeah.
books it always feels like the joke is on them, and they don't know who's like messing with them.
Yeah.
It's always some unforeseen force.
Those ideas and that sort of ability to sort of um, kind of transport you to this kind of world. I remember Blondie did that I thought Blondie did that incredibly well, like with individual songs, like kind of
Yeah,
Atomic,
yeah,
but
yeah.
also the album All Too American, which I remember at the time got really slated, because of the sort of this change of direction. But for me, that album really, it just kind of like, I mean, whether there was my own romantic notion, I'd never been to New York at that time. I was way too. I was only 12 years old, but it was just incredible, the feeling that it kind of gave you. It was almost like you were kind of living there. It just you could imagine that world, and I think those are albums that do that. They just this word relatability. It does it strengthens the connection, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, I think of like records that kind of did that for me in the, just when I was getting into music, and
Mm,
like, I mean, the first time that kind of happened, and it helps when there's some sort of visual accompaniment. Like I
mm,
remember when MTV2 launched, and I heard Daft Punk's One More Time for the first
yeah,
time, and they'd gotten the
mm,
guy from made that anime series, or the Galaxy Express 999. So it's like
mm,
they made a whole film with him. So I saw that
mm,
music video, and I just like I it was like a transformative moment of like, what
yeah.
is this? Nothing
What is it?
sounds like this, yeah.
Yeah,
And then eventually, in high school, like Boards of Canada, Music Has a Right to Children was like, that was just, I think when you're at that age, when you're still kind of like, there was something almost scary about listening to it. There was
yeah,
the kind of weird, eerie, dystopic, kind of nauseating synths. Like it definitely,
yeah,
and especially around, around the time you're like starting to smoke weed, and like,
yeah.
you're starting to have this relationship with music. So that stuff to me, and it's like, in that regard, like if it had some sort of element that made it sound kind of cinematic, then
Mm,
that's definitely something that's like, that was always kind of music that I felt always kind of drawn towards. Like broadcast had that quality big time.
yeah,
Um, and it's funny because on this record, I mean, obviously like Avalon is one of my all time favorite records, and
yeah,
that is so. I mean, and it was utilized in a lot of films. I mean, it's like, it's funny. There's a uh like Brian Ferry in general, he always pops up in like erotic thrillers, like 9.5 weeks, which is, I mean, a very silly, but in terms of vibe, such a great Adrian Lin movie. Like
absolutely.
just the cinematography, the slick minimalist apartment that he has, with the kind of like
Yeah,
postmodern furniture, and he's got that like iconic like cassette deck that automatically like
yeah,
comes out and like rotates the tape or whatever. But
yeah,
there's a
yeah.
scene where they're like fucking in a clock tower listening to Brian Ferry's Slave to Love. It's so ridiculous, but you're just like,
It's
but
yeah.
that's the vibe. It's like, you're just like,
This
oh,
was just
that's,
made for each other. Yeah,
oh,
totally.
completely, completely. So, that element of it, it's like, yeah. So what if I want, this album kind of wanting to tap into like a sophisti-pop type palette, that
Yeah.
that was definitely part of the blueprint for it.
Go back to when you were younger, when you were growing up, in terms of your like really sort of standout influences. Not just musical, but kind of like people that you were maybe hanging out with, where you were living. What was really sort of influencing you and as kind of stayed with you through your life.
Well, I mean, well, first and foremost, like I definitely had parents that, were interested in art in some way or another. Like my
Mm,
mom was a news anchor. I think she'd always wanted to work in film or television, but
mm,
journalism was kind of like the avenue that she took.
mm,
So she would do like the 5 and the 10 o'clock news for like the local like Telemundo station, and then my
yeah,
dad, he was a musician who had
mm,
like a brief sort of brush with success in the early '80s,
mm,
and then and then basically was like that he had a little bit of success in Mexico, and then we came to
yeah,
the U.S. and he just he's been a gigging musician ever since, just
yeah,
playing at lounges and restaurants and stuff.
mm,
But I definitely just grew up around music. That was something
mm,
that even if I didn't really decide to learn an instrument maybe until like later in high school,
mm,
uh, I there was already a sensibility there in that I had observed my dad and really my brother, who I think kind of sort of he took him under his wing, and my brother was really learning guitar and bass at a pretty early age,
right,
and that was kind of his direction. My brother eventually, I think in middle school, he got really into bass. He was just like playing so much Victor Wooten, which at the time I was just like couldn't stand it. Didn't have an ear for fusion. Now it's like as you get older, there's a little bit more there. You're
yeah,
like, well, there's like a couple of good Weather Report songs or something, uh, but at the time, like we had very different tastes in music in general. But yeah, my brother was kind of hard at work on his instruments, and it's funny because like at that age, like you don't realize you're being given like a skill set. Like my dad, I mean, he taught me how to sing and like
mm,
forced me to learn all these like Frank Sinatra standards when I was
yeah,
little, and I'd have to sing them at Christmas and stuff like that. But at the time, I remember being so annoyed to have to do that because I just wanted to play
oh,
Sonic 3. Like
I'm with you on that. I'm with you
yeah,
totally.
and
Yeah,
I wish I would have understood. It's like, no, 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 this is like going to come in handy down the road.
yeah,
You're going to want to know how to do this. Uh, and and I mean, obviously, I'm very grateful for that. I mean, in regards to like uh film, I mean, it was funny because I think it was like, I mean, everybody has an embarrassing first movie that like is like the movie that gets them into movies. Mine
mm,
wasn't that bad. I mean, I watched it recently. It hasn't aged that well, but I think it was like Snatch. I went to go see it with like
oh
my
yeah,
my Mormon best friend in middle school.
yeah,
And then I after the movie, like I told my parents, I was just like, oh my god, we I want to see it again. You guys have to see this movie with me. And I took them to see it, and they were like, "Yeah, I mean, this is fine." I was like, "What do you mean? This is incredible." And they're like, "Well, if you like stuff like this, then maybe you'd like this." And there was just
mm,
there's a summer where like my parents I think were just fans of like De Niro and Scorsese
mm,
stuff. So it was like we
mm,
watched like Taxi Driver, and then obviously The Godfather and Deer Hunter, and
yeah,
a
yeah,
lot of '70s American stuff. And coincidentally, that same summer, Stanley Kubrick died, and
mm,
Cinemax was just showing every night. They were showing a different movie of his, and I
yeah,
forget which all I watched, but I was like watched 2001 and watched Clockwork Orange, and
mm,
probably Barry Lyndon or The Shining. So it was just like, so I kind of got this education all at once, and that kind of
mm,
just set me off. And I was like 11 or something, so I was definitely too young to be watching those movies, but I
yeah,
understood the intrinsic value of them, and they were just amazing.
mm, mm,
And that kind of just set me on this path where I just became obsessed, and still am with film and music was kind of this other byproduct where like I just didn't really pay much attention to music. I remember that I think I heard Pyramid Song on MTV2,
mm,
and I told my mom that it was like for my birthday I got like a Discman, and it was like
yeah,
3 CDs, and one I think was like the Mission Impossible 2 soundtrack. One was like
yeah,
the some now that's what I call music, like bullshit, and then the third one was Radiohead Amnesiac.
yeah,
And I that was the first kind of like critical, ear moment of discerning
mm,
that like one of these is clearly different and vastly superior to the other ones.
mm,
So I kind of just was like into Radiohead for a minute. And then it's funny, I had this literary magazine teacher in high school, and her husband was like in bands, and he had like left on the shelf this like uh, this copy of this book that was called, at the time, it was printed in Williamsburg. It was like by the Free Williamsburg Press, and it was like called the Hipster Handbook, and it was like
Yeah.
a joke. It was like making fun of hipsters, but it had a lot of really good music and movie recommendations in there.
Yeah.
And my friend at the time, like found Pitchfork through it, so
Yeah.
he started listening to like indie stuff,
Yeah.
and of course, he was very gatekeepery about it. Like at first it was like, I was like, "How are you hearing this stuff?" He's like, "Oh, just here and there." And it's like, "Oh, have you heard
Yeah.
this band? Have you heard this band?" And then of course, eventually, I found out what Pitchfork was, and then obviously, like, started getting into a lot of indie stuff. And
Mhm.
at the time, I remember, Enemy was still
Still a thing.
yeah, well, it was going
Mhm.
strong with, like, it's I felt like they kind of latched on to, like, because people now call it indie sleaze, but back then it was like
Mm.
new rave. It was like Enemy was
Yes.
like championing
Yeah.
stuff like Klaxons and Later the Pier, and I remember,
Yeah.
Errol Walken being, it's like I just started getting into that stuff, and obviously with that, like got into a lot of like French touch stuff, like, Ed
Mm.
Banger Records and
Mm.
Alan Brax and Fred Falk and all that. So it was, that was a very like formative time in terms of kind of building all of these influences.
So you've had as far as music's concerned, certainly, so like quite an open mind, kind of right throughout in terms of what you listen to, your influences. I guess that's kind of feeding through. Was it the same with film as well, that you were really kind of open minded about what you wanted to watch and what was influencing you?
Yeah, I think it's like as you get older, especially as a DJ, you kind of start going down these rabbit holes, and then you realize,
Mm.
like, oh man, it's like been a whole year and I haven't listened to anything new. So
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm.
I try to break out of that occasionally, because I remember that at the beginning in high school and beginning of college, like I was just, a sponge. Like
Mm.
I had it's really funny. There was we all had this app in the band house I was living in that was called like R Tunes, and if you were on the same Wi-Fi network, you could just download each other's like iTunes
Got you.
discography.
Yeah.
So so everybody was bringing records into the mix, and on one side I'd be listening to like some '60s Brazilian record, and then on the other side I'd be listening to some like you know harsh electro, like Detroit thing. So it was kind of,
Mm.
I just wanted to know all of it. It's like I was just excited
Yeah.
to just get into all of it. But it's funny because uh, I remember that I used to have I used to make a dream log. Like I didn't like writing down like my dreams, because the act of waking up and trying to remember it, the coordination would, like, you'd start to forget details.
Yeah.
So I would
Yeah.
just leave, like, I would leave GarageBand or Ableton running and at night, and then just wake up and hit record and just start talking with my eyes closed. And like an idiot, I was
Wow.
documenting it on my iTunes and just putting the dates next to it. So then one day I'm like hanging out in the kitchen, I'm telling somebody this dream that I had, and they're like, "Oh yeah," and then you go down like the giant slide, right? And I was like, I just had this moment of like, wait, what? Like, how the fuck do you know what I was dreaming about? And I realized that everyone in the house was downloading my dream log and listening to them.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
yeah, 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 yeah. I was like, definitely had egg on my face, but it was, but yeah, that at that time, like, you don't, you're not like, because it's not a career, because you're not making something specific. You're just, I
Mm.
think it puts you in this open palette kind of place.
Mm.
And your relationship to music does change a little bit when you start making records, just
Mm.
because there's like, you're looking for stuff to be influenced by. You're looking for certain, you're looking for certain results now, or
Mm.
like if you DJ certain type of music, you're looking for that kind of music, and most of your bandwidth is occupied by the pursuit of that specific type of music. So it's like,
Mm.
I think that's something that changes, and you have to kind of occasionally pull yourself out of it. But I like the genre rabbit holes that I go down, because
Yeah.
it's what I love, and obviously, like, I think, like a lot of people, I was like trying to buy happiness on Discogs during the pandemic. So, I got on like a Lincoln Olivetti kick, who was basically like the Giorgio Moroder of Brazil in the 70s and
Yeah.
80s. Like he was like
Yeah.
a hit doctor, and he had a very
Wow.
distinct like synth boogie style. So I just bought, like, just every record I could find that was produced by him, and it's like, oh yeah, they all kind of got a little bit of that flavor
Mm.
that he brings to the table. And just I like stuff like that. It's nerdy. It's joyful for me. It doesn't necessarily always translate to like the fans, you know. Like
Yeah.
um, I know that there's probably a core fan base, you know, a core group that like is kind of actively looking for all the references and trying to figure out what it's about. And then some, you
Mm.
know, and then there's probably a lot of people that it's just like, huh, this doesn't. I guess you know, it's like it's still kind of chill wave, or you know, they'll just latch on to
Yeah.
the one thing they heard like a decade ago, and that's
Yeah.
you know, I
Yeah.
mean, but that is what it is. It's like that's kind of why I'm like I I really you know very much so make music for myself. You know,
Yeah.
and obviously you know I trust my ear. I know if I made something good or that I think that the fans might like, but ultimately like it's a very selfish pursuit.
It has to be for
Which
you, doesn't it?
yeah.
I mean, you know, you're the sort of the creator, and you know, your you know, it's like sort of vitality in that, vitality of, you know, kind of health and mind in producing new stuff has got to be, it's got to be at its peak, you know, you know, at all times. Otherwise, it's going to come through in lackluster music. You know, you've got to be sort of fresh, and however that works for you.
I mean, it's difficult. It or well, I wouldn't say it's difficult. It might become difficult in the near future. In that, like, you know, I mean, every record kind of takes longer to make, and I didn't
Mm,
really this album start to finish. Like, it really only took me like 2 years, 2.5 years. It's like
mm.
I was touring for a long time after the third record, and then
Yeah.
I was trying to write like this Sight Cumbia record, and I kind of spent a year and a half on that, and just kind of got burnt out on it. Shelved
Mm.
it. Pandemic started. Deadlines were all gone. So I didn't mean for it to be 8 years, but I kept joking, you know, that it was like by the time that I deliver this record to the label, it's going to be like the end of Interstellar, where it's like it's a whole new generation of people. Like the past generation has died, and like my label head is just like an AI version of himself, you know, or
Yes.
something. But
Yes.
um, but it did kind of feel a little bit like that, just in terms of like the industry that I was coming back into.
Mm.
Because I remember even just a couple of years ago, there was like an interview with the CEO of Spotify that like really like bummed me out, where it was like, man, talk about the tail wagging the dog, you know, where he
Mm.
basically like the gist of it was just like, well, you know, those days of like, you know, making a record once every 2 years and touring it are done. If you want to
Yeah,
stay
I heard that.
relevant, you have to be more, you know, you're just gonna have to be more productive. And it's just like, yeah, you know, like you know, says the guy who's
It's
never tried to
insane.
write a song in his fucking life, you know, and there's a
Absolutely.
certain
Yeah.
I mean, we've already kind of experienced the unfortunate devaluation of music, you know, but now
Mm.
what's going to further exacerbate that is just the commodification of it and the necessity of its quantity in order to stay relevant. Uh,
Absolutely. Absolutely
and
right.
that to me is very scary because it's like I don't like to half-ass things. I don't. There's already so
Yeah.
much noise. There's so much clutter. I don't. You know. I at least like to think that I'm making things that warrant their own existence. Like make
Absolutely.
something that should be out there. You know, and not just
Absolutely.
make something because it can be out there. uh, and um, and that you know is a little scary because you see how like the album releases are structured now, and the reason
Mm.
why there's so much on the front end of it is that it's
Mm.
hard to continue to create buzz after the record's out. Like I
Yeah.
guess
Yeah. Yeah.
the past couple of years, you know, it's become this thing where like, cool, the record comes out and people talk about it for a couple of weeks, and then it's done. And like the days
Mm.
of like, okay, you put out a record, you can tour it, you're good for like 18 months. You know, you've got like a
Yeah.
cycle that you can go out and promote it.
Mm. Mm.
And I think it's gonna start making for a lot of really mediocre shit from artists you love, you know, and that to me is the
Agree.
saddest part of it because because that's that part again where
I
suddenly you
agree.
know where commerce and your ability to make a living is inevitably going to interact with what you're making. And I think about it. I mean, I'm at least like, you know, this is the first time that I've written a record where I had a surplus of tracks and I knew that I had
Mm.
about enough for an EP. So, you know,
Mm.
next year I'll probably drop that. But beyond that, you know, there's a certain like, you know, I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, whether I make a living from it or not, I'm not gonna just start, you know, shitting out records because because some guy in Sweden is telling me
He's
that that's
telling
what
you
I
to
need to
do
do
it.
to make a living. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely right. I'm totally with you on that. Totally with you. Can you remember you know how you felt you know what you know making your first record, you know those sort of like nascent those sort of nascent days, how you felt in terms of your um almost like sort of self-belief and sort of self-confidence in what you're producing compared to where you are now? What's that kind of journey been like for you?
Well, the confidence back then was fake. It was cockiness. I think now the
Mm,
confidence is more rooted in just like you know, I trust my ears and I know what I like,
yeah,
and over time I've slowly kind of built a toolkit, you know, a skill
yeah,
set to like make these things happen. And it's always I learned more than anything during the pandemic that like when you're so busy always making records and touring them, you're not really like growing much. So, you know, like it's
yeah,
my pet project was like let's buy a piano and finally learn how to sight read because in
yeah,
2015, like I'd brought in some new members and when my brother joined the band, I had to find people that could speak his musical language, you know, like more kind of trained musicians. So suddenly I became like the least technically adept person in my band. So I had to, you know, but it kind of it lit a fire into my ass to be like, well, you know, like you should want to be on that
interesting.
level, you know.
Yeah,
But on the first record, it was just like, you know, it was cockiness
yeah,
and there is you I think you do have to be a little delusional, you know, to take any kind of risk, you know, in terms of like putting your art out there.
mm,
And some, you know, you might be right, you might be wrong, but the follow through is everything, you know. And in that,
mm,
and that's
mm,
one thing that I had even then was just like, if I say I'm going to finish this thing, I'm going to finish it. It might not be today, it might not be a month from now, but that first album, weirdly enough, like because I was trying to make dance music for a minute, you know,
mm,
and just kind of really writing like the late sort of wave of like blog house and new rave and
mm,
electro stuff back then. So it was like, you know, still trying to sound like other things that I really liked at the time. And then you know, I quit my first band. Uh I had a band called Ghost Hustler that was
Ghost
like
Hustler.
literally like
Yeah,
my first or sophomore year of high school. And
mm,
sorry, not a freshman or sophomore year of college. Sorry.
mm,
um, and we had some, you know, some major beginner's luck. Like we got right up in Pitchfork about it, you know. So
yeah,
that for me was just like, whoa, you know, just
well,
the idea that there could be you know, access to the outside world in such a way
yeah,
was like really like exciting. And then you know that band broke up, and I had this sort of transitional project that was Vega, and it was like I wound up kind of having one song that did sort of, you know, kind of make some waves, and you know, just within that kind of blog world. um, but it was you know, the finished EP. My friend in Miami Horror, like, you know, helped me mix it, and that was a huge
mm,
help just because like that was the thing is like dance production was always so tedious that by the time
mm,
that I got a kick drum sounding the way I wanted it to, I forget what I was even writing, you know. So it was
yeah,
always
yeah,
kind of this like feeling sort of lost in the weeds. And then Neon Indian, you know, was just kind of like I discovered, you know, an effects chain that just sounded awesome, you know, and
mm,
it didn't, it was like, well, it's not for dance music, it's for something else. So suddenly like reconciling the part of me that had always like, you know, that loved electronic music, and then the part of me that like loved, you know, this kind of weirdo psychedelic
yeah,
lo-fi stuff kind of finally could merge. And it did in that project, and it was such a eureka moment that I felt so on a roll that I would just try, like I almost as a creative exercise, like finish a song every day, do that, just but
mm,
don't overthink it, just finish it. And
mm,
just I was it never and it's never happened like that again. I think it's like you always
mm,
have your whole life to write that first album, you know. It's like,
yeah,
you know, you're by the time you're kind of ready to do something, or that you've found the right framework for it, like you might just start running,
mm,
and then suddenly you're like, you know, you're like, holy shit, I have a whole album, you know. And then your life starts to change. I mean, it couldn't have come at a better time because it was like, you know, my GPA was like dropping because
mm,
the campus was too far and I had to get there by bus, and it was just like it was just a disaster. I was
it's just
ill-equipped
hard
for
work.
academia at the time. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, you know, so this was like it came in the midst of like a depression, you know, like I mean, you know, talking about those movies, like just feeling like a loser. Like it's like I don't, you know, you
mm,
had it, you lost it, what's going on? And then and I took a semester off, and my, you know, my parents obviously were like, you know, I remember my dad saying, you know, it's not like we didn't come to this country so that you could get an education or anything.
yeah, yeah,
So, you know, the pressure was high to actually use that time to make something.
mm, mm,
And it just so happened that, you know, that I did. And it's never come that easy again, and I think also in part because, once I kind of learned that like lo-fi trick, I didn't necessarily want to repeat myself, and I
Mm.
kept always wanting to kind of grow, but that took, it took a lot of effort in the second record. And it's funny, it's like the first one took a month, second one took like, like 18 months, and then the third one took like 3 or 4 years, and then now this one took 8 years. So you can expect the next record in 16 years.
There's a
Uh,
pattern here, isn't there?
yeah, 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 yeah. I know. I mean, it's like now that now that I'm back, I want to be a little bit more prolific. I don't know what that means for me.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
but I do think that, there is like, I always see my ideas as like, they always like nag at me until they manifest, so it's if there's film scripts or song ideas or stuff that
mm.
you've been wanting to do, a type of record you've been wanting to make, it's always going to kind of just be sitting there being like, make me,
Yeah,
um
it's almost like a kind of instinctive thing, isn't it? When you do, when it feels right to you, and it's got to
yeah.
feel that. You've got to feel it, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, well, the good news is that there's a backlog of stuff. It's like my desk is still piled up with
Still
like,
part.
what yeah, 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 with what to do next. So, there might come a time where I have to stop for a while and reassess. But if it's the first record in 8 years, it'd be lovely if there would be another one in 2 years. And not necessarily,
Yeah.
in the next decade.
Would you call yourself a perfectionist in what you're doing?
Yeah, to a fault, I'd say
Mm,
it's, because sometimes like I won't, even if something's fine, I might not enjoy it, until time has passed and I can kind of look at it with a different lens. And that's
mm.
that's maybe more representative of the film work. Like
Yes.
it's easier like with music when it's just you and you're bringing in players and
Mm,
you're coaching performances at, and maybe you've got an engineer, maybe eventually I work with a mix engineer and I'm sending him notes. It's like it's very much so a controlled environment. I think with filmmaking, there's so many other variables
mm,
that it's really just like, what you were able to capture that day. And if it's
mm,
what you were really going for, and it looks one way in your head and it's always going to look a little bit different, or just look like something else entirely. And the hope is that even if you miss the mark, you miss it in some beautiful, bizarre way that you weren't expecting. And the same
mm,
thing with music. It's like I set out to make one kind of record and it very quickly becomes something else.
mm,
But it's interesting. It's like, you know, there's like I remember the first video I did with a co-director was for Slumlord, and that was some crazy like $50,000 big budget thing, and there's so many
mm,
extras. And
mm.
I realized that throughout the night we'd spent so much. We spent the first half of the night just getting this this like long 4 minute
Wow.
shot, that then
Yeah.
we had to burn through like a 28 a shot list that was like 28 shots.
Mm,
And it became very obvious that if we were even going to remotely make that time, all this preciousness of like, no, I saw this as a static shot on a tripod. Like the DP was just like, we're gonna have to go handheld for the rest of this. And you
mm,
make those decisions, and at the time they eat at you, and you watch the thing, and you're like, all right, well, this got about 80% of the way there, or something like
mm,
that. And I still, I mean, in hindsight now, I was like, what are you talking about? Video's great, But at the time, obviously, you're like, you're trying to save the thing and make sure the thing happens, and you're not necessarily like, you realize that you're making some creative sacrifices along the way because it's just time and money. But then when I made the next video I did was like literally with a couple $100 and a VHS
mm,
camera. I mean, to be fair, I was traveling through Asia on tour, so I
mm.
had very incredible locations for free.
Yeah.
And then when I came back to New York, I figured out what the narrative of it would be. And I just went to a prop house, rented some stuff, and then went to Chinatown. And like, cool,
Mm,
this little street right here could be Hong Kong. Let's do it. So we
yeah.
we
Yeah.
shot all the pickups, and that just literally like when it's just you on your own with the camera, it reminded me more of like making music because that video, even though it's VHS or whatever, it's exactly what I set out to make. It's like
Mm,
the shots are exactly as I would have imagine them in my head. And the more people you introduce into a production, the
mm,
harder
mm,
it is to communicate all the
mm,
ideas with everybody. So you're inevitably going to hit these snags where um where something doesn't work, a location doesn't
Yeah.
work, or a performance isn't working, or you're running out of time, so you have to change the story, shoot a new ending, and I'm still kind of learning how to deal with that in a way where like you're getting nothing but happy accidents, and you're not, because the thing
Interesting.
you can't do is sulk and just like
Yeah.
and because I've seen those sets, I've been on sets like that, and I don't like. I think everybody looks to the director to kind of be like everyone's cheerleader a little bit, and like
Yeah.
if you're being a diva, like
It's
then why are they even there?
it's interesting. I mean, the sort of one area that I'm of our personalities that I'm kind of quite interested in. I think it's a really important part, which is emotional intelligence, and I guess that
Yes,
that what you're talking about, that almost self-awareness of how you're behaving around others when things maybe don't go as right, or as well as you want them to, or in the direction that you want them to, all that ability to kind of work with others is just
yeah,
really really important. And especially go back to what we were saying in the introduction, about the way that the world is, which where it's so volatile and changing so quickly.
yeah.
Having that ability to get shit done these days, I think is super
It.
important.
I mean, emotional intelligence to me has always been like uh, it's honestly, it's what I look for in friendships, and it's
Yeah.
definitely like a
Mm.
prerequisite even before anything else in a relationship, because it's always going to be like people are always kind of talking about this sort of like triad of like
Mm.
attractiveness and funniness and intelligence, and it's like like, oh, this sort of rubric of like maybe one person's going to have
Yeah.
more of the other and less of the other, but
Yeah.
even before any of that, if they don't have emotional intelligence, if they're not capable of empathy,
Empathy.
and if they don't, to me, I'm like, I realize that and maybe this came from like I did like 4 years of like speech and debate in high school,
Mm.
and I
Okay.
kind of realized that the only shot you have at changing someone's mind is actually listening to them,
Mm.
and I think that a lot of people fundamentally don't understand that or want to internalize it. It's like they're waiting for the other person to shut up so that they can kind of get their thing through.
Getting through.
And and there is a certain like there's a little bit of narcissism that comes with being a musician, like but
Mm.
I try to be as aware about it as I can and not neglect other avenues of my life, or be there for friends and family when they need me,
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
easy to kind of just sort of fall into yourself and have it be all about me, 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 and it might feel that way when you're putting out a record and you're
Totally.
announcing the singles and press shots and all this,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
hey, look at me in this suit, so it's like there's the you that you're presenting, but the you that's at home, like just kind of getting through the day, is like definitely a different person, and I think that you know if you I try to surround myself with people that are easy in that regard,
Mm.
because as I get older, like, and I've definitely uh you know there's definitely been like drama in the family, and there's one
Mm.
side of the family that just is very drama prone. I won't say which, but like I've grown up around enough of that, where there's definitely
Mm.
maybe some kind of like mental health issues even, and it's just
Mm.
like I don't, like I've lived it. I don't need to do that again. It's
Yeah.
like if I sense that somebody sort of thrives on drama or feeds on it, or is too narcissistic to kind of like
Mhm.
understand, to sort of meet you in the middle, or like whether this be an artistic collaboration or a friendship,
Yeah, it's very true.
I'm really like I really try to look for that, and I try to like I've gotten kind of you get better at spotting the red flags
Yes,
earlier
you
on
do.
as you get older.
I think you hit the nail on the head about listening. That's it's a kind of fundamental thing, and we don't do it, and it is one of the hardest things to do as well. Especially when you listen to somebody where they sort of fundamentally they're saying something that is contradictory to what you're about as a
Yeah, yeah,
person.
yeah,
But to listen, to understand where they're coming from, and maybe what has influenced them in their life, because there's influences all along the way is really
Yeah.
important, but it's the hardest thing to do when you kind of like immediate response tells you to shut them down, but it's not the way to that we're going to kind of solve things, in
Yeah, I
whatever
mean, well,
element.
I mean, look, it's in a heightened state in the U.S. I mean, it's like
Mm,
these days I like to say like it's like Dunkin' Donuts. It's like America runs on Dunkin'. It's like it literally runs
mm,
on Dunkin' on other people. You know, it's like
mm,
it's
yeah,
everyone is kind of
yeah,
in this heightened state of near hysteria and
yeah,
so ready to kind of like be at each other's throats. You know, everything's become
mm,
politicized. You
mm,
know, and it's as a musician, you kind of have this weird like you know there's a mounting list of responsibilities and things they expect
true,
from you is like you have to be a
yeah,
pundit, you have to be a role model, you have to be a talking head, yet you got to have a hot take on that, you know. And I try to avoid
very
that
true.
stuff because it's you know it's like I really I don't know, maybe it's growing up in Texas where it was like you know like I
Mm,
definitely grew up around plenty of people that I did not identify with, you know. And this is
mm,
also just like yeah, I mean I moved from Mexico and the only time I ever experienced like overt racism or you know stuff that like you know I mean now I think maybe as I'm older you know or like it's things are more ambiguous like if somebody kind of you know rubs you the wrong way or like you know but I remember it's like you know like kids can be cruel like I remember you know middle school or like that's when someone's just straight to your face like
yeah,
making
yeah,
racist jokes or something
mm,
but it didn't make these people monsters. It's just like this is what you have in within your vantage point,
mm,
and you know, and you know, it's not my job to emotionally labor to change your mind, but I can
mm,
certainly try, you know, and I can
mm,
certainly just live my own life and treat people with mutual respect. But it definitely is something that like yeah, I mean, it's like it sucks when you know when you encounter somebody that you know just has a value system that is almost yeah that contradicts yours you know but I
mm.
have to you have to like it's almost kind of you know it's like the stoic philosophy of just like you know you can't there's no use in fretting over things that are outside of your control you
This is
know
very true. Yeah,
and the best thing you can do, and I have to remind myself of that a lot, you know, because I'll start, you know, I'm like high functioning OCD, so it's like I start to just invent problems to worry about, and then I have to sort of like come back to
mm,
this center of just like you know like what literally what is the purpose of it? I think it's like I think it was literally like a Marcus Aurelius quote where he says like most of the suffering that a person will experience is in their imagination, you know, throughout
true.
their life
Yeah, yeah.
and I try to kind of just take things at face value but you know and part of that means like with people you know like
And
I yeah
I was going to say, and does your creativity, does that help to, kind of like, recenter you and kind of ground you and give you that, comfort almost.
um yeah honestly you know and I mean it goes back to like making music for yourself and you know kind of
Yeah,
first and foremost like enjoying the labor of it and you know and ultimately like how it in it like again I can't control what people think about the music you know
yeah,
I can't tell people what to think about it you know
yeah,
I can tell them what the song what the song is about what it was influenced by and I try not to talk about that stuff because again it's you know we're in this weird parasocial thing where they want to know what you had for breakfast they
yeah,
want to know if you put hot sauce on it they want to know if you know
yeah.
before you wrote the song and it's in my mind I'm just like man if I would have known what Mortar had for breakfast, like the morning they wrote Bizarre Love Triangle, it wouldn't have further enriched the experience of listening to that song for me. Like, I don't fucking care, you know, like there's, yeah, so it's like there's a certain, they want, you know, there's something that I guess, you know, that fans or not necessarily the fans, but it's just what is demanded of you. You know, it's like
True,
people
very
tell
true.
me, like TikTok, you know, there's been some pressure, you know, light pressure, you know, just to get on it and start, you know,
Oh my
engaging
god.
with it. And my friend was just like, well, you know, what you do is just like do what you would already, you know, there's something you already like doing, but just film it. And it's like that's it's like that's for me, man. Like if I'm watching this movie, if I'm exercising, if I'm you know eating at this restaurant, that's for Alan. The music, you can have all that you know but it just it's like it feels very it's strange and you know it's a generational thing too so people feel very comfortable with that you know
Yes,
um
that's true.
and part of me is just like you know the things I do therapeutically like DJ at home or something it's like you know that's just like sometimes it's nice to just have that for yourself,
Have that
and
have that you time. Yeah,
yeah, it's
absolutely
important.
right.
It's, yeah.
Brilliant. That's really wonderful, Alan. Thanks so much for coming on, and it's been really great to talk to you. And congratulations on a fantastic album as well. And best of luck for the release.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you so much. Amazing questions, and yeah, great talking to you.